Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to do a manga vlog and maybe do these periodically throughout the year, we'll see, just to help me stay on top of my manga reading. There's so many things I want to get around to, so I thought this would be a good way to hold myself accountable and then also kind of bring you along as I'm reading through some manga. I especially think, since this channel is not manga specific and it covers more than just manga, that it can be very easy for me to get sucked into something else, whether it be a video game or a TV show, movie, adaptation, whatever the case may be, and then manga kind of goes to the side until I come back to it. So hopefully in doing these vlogs, it allows me and you to kind of stay caught up with things. So far this year, which the year's only just started, I've read through Yona of the Dawn, volume 40. This came out just at the end of 2023. And then I went ahead and picked it up right at the beginning of this year, which it's still the beginning of this year. I don't know when this vlog's going to go up. But regardless, it's fun to be back into this world. This is a series that it's very easy to jump back into. If you don't know anything about Yona of the Dawn, I did do a whole in-depth non-spoiler review, so you can hear more about the general plot there. But to give you a very brief overview, we're following a young woman named Yona who has been pushed out of her throne, and she is trying to gain her throne back using the help of her bodyguard and these ancient dragon warriors. However, the person who has taken over the throne is actually doing a pretty good job of it, and so you're kind of questioning whether or not Yona should take the throne back, as it seems like the entirety of the kingdom would be better off potentially with this other person in power. You do have this moral conundrum throughout the series, and you have mixed in with that a lot of angst, especially at the beginning. I actually don't like the angst at the beginning. I think it is better as the series progresses. It gets toned down a little bit, and you kind of mix that in with some of the more important aspects. At the beginning, I think it sort of is the thing that's propelling the plot forward, or at the very least, it is almost overshadowing the importance of the actual plot. And I think as you get through more and more of the series, it kind of takes a back seat, because Yona, as she is growing and she is learning and she is becoming a better person, I think you really see the emphasis of what is important taking its rightful place. Anyway, all that to say, the series is a lot of fun. It's one of those series that is so easy to come back to, because it is, despite having so many characters, always a good time. There's just kind of a flow to it where you, even when you're like, who's this again? You know immediately. The characters are almost caricatures. They really stand out, which sometimes can be a drawback for me, but in this series, I have grown to love so many of these people in this story. I will say this newest volume is kind of right in the middle of what feels like other people's stories, and I don't mind that. I do think we're building to something interesting. I will say, though, that I wish we'd gotten a little bit more of our main cast in this one, because we're focusing so much on the side characters. What I do like is that's never for a throwaway thing. You will see other characters come back and they play a bigger role later. So I imagine that these characters will kind of get the completion of their current arc, then we'll return to our main characters, and then these other people will play a role later. You're already seeing that. Other characters that we've interacted with are coming back, and you're seeing some pretty awesome aspects to do with the politics and the battles and the allies that Yona has made. So I do think that it's not just to throw it in there just to have some kind of character of the week sort of a feel. But that said, I do sort of miss just watching our main characters be a little bit more of the focus, seeing the way that their friendships are blossoming. There's definitely a little bit of romance in this series. So I did wish we got more of that in this volume, but I am enjoying seeing the greater world within this. And then from there, not fun, nothing happy really can be said about this, and that would be Grave of the Fireflies. So just watched this movie. This is one of Studio Ghibli's first, and it was one of the bleakest, most depressing things I've ever seen. If you have heard about this movie, you have likely heard that it is very, very, very tragic. It follows these two young children as they are affected by war. They are innocent children within Japan during World War II. And you're seeing what happens when they are left to take care of themselves. It's not your usual kind of war story. You're not actually seeing anybody on the battlefield. It's not brutal in the same way. It's kind of an unrelenting, slow bleakness. And I think that it was brilliant. I think it was masterful. I think it's very, very difficult to watch, though. I imagine this has got to be so difficult to watch if you're a parent. The idea of what would happen to my children if I wasn't there to protect them. I think you can say the same thing for anybody who is somebody's caregiver. So I want to say it's a must watch because I think it depicts the ways in which it's not just the violence of war, but the way that that violence trickles into everything, every innocent person's life. I want to say it's a must watch for how well it depicted that, but I also recognize that it is one of the most difficult things that you could probably watch. It's terribly, terribly sad. But I think a fantastic movie. I'm very, very picky with movies. Studio Ghibli, once again, proving itself to know how to really utilize this medium and tell a story in a shorter amount of time with visuals. The visuals are fantastic in this. I think that the symbolism, the color usage is all phenomenal. I think I might do a review, a more in-depth review for this because I think it deserves it. And it's, from what I've seen, I don't know if it's because it's older or because of the subject matter, it's not a Studio Ghibli movie that seems to be as talked about. And I think it deserves to be praised and discussed. It's phenomenal, but again, so incredibly sad. If you've not heard much about this, just know going in that you are going, I think I've already kind of said, it's about the bleakest thing that you can watch. From there, I have jumped back into Elden Ring. So I have said in a couple videos that one of my anticipated releases this year, if we do, I think we will get it this year. I just haven't seen a specific release date, but would be the DLC Shadow of the Erdtree. And I thought about just going into Elden Ring, kind of getting back into it and just going right into the DLC, but I was like, no, let's restart. And I've been having so much fun. I am a tank, though. So the very beginning is actually weirdly boring because I'm sure that's the case for basically anybody that's beat Elden Ring, that when you go to replay it, you're just so much more powerful than everything around you. And I have my strength maxed out, so I'm like literally stronger than everything else around me. But otherwise, I have been having a lot of fun just stomping all over everything. It's been great. I'm dreading the moment that it finally, my level is back to where the game is actually challenging. I'm like, I know I'm going to be put in my place, and I know I'm going to be bummed out about it when I get there. And then my love-hate relationship is going to favor the hate as I get into that area, I'm sure. Right now I'm just in Lindell, so having a lot of fun jumping back into this and just appreciating this game and its world and the intricacies with the details in the world and all of those things. It's so much fun. I'm having such a great time being back in it. We'll see how my feelings shift as I continue to play through, though. I'm very curious for those of you that are fans of Elden Ring. Are you going to be replaying the game before Shadow of the Erdtree, or are you going to do what I was originally going to do and you're just going to jump into the DLC? I'm very curious. But anyway, I want to also highlight what I'm planning to pick up for this upcoming week, because I covered what I have picked up the week before, and then as we progress, what I'm wanting to get around to. So I think for now, I don't want to say too much. If I do end up reading more, I'll let you know. But my plan is to get back into Vinland Saga. I mentioned in my 24 for 2024 video that I want to reread Vinland Saga and then just get through the whole thing and be able to properly discuss the series, as this has been one of my favorites for a long time, like years and years and years. It's been one of my favorites. And then I feel like my main channel is a book channel, so if you don't know, we refer to that portion of the internet as BookTube. But I feel like Vinland Saga finally started to get the attention of other people on BookTube, and I'm like, yay, because it's good and it deserves it. But at the same time, I'm like, I want to go back to the series because I love it. And last year I had so much fun rereading the Cosmere and the Shades of Magic series, and so I'm just ready to reread the series as well. I was planning to start that reread last year, but I just didn't get around to it. My reread of this, I mean. So I'm very excited. It's one of my husband's favorites also, and I'm very hopeful that we can do some discussion videos of this series, and I know a lot of you are big fans as well, so I can't wait to give it its proper attention and hype. So I'm planning to pick that bind up. And then, because I think after watching Grave of the Fireflies, I'm just kind of in a Studio Ghibli kick. And this is a movie, I believe, for Studio Ghibli, but also wrote, I believe, Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. I have these beautiful giant editions, so I'm planning to pick this series up. I don't know how much of it I'm gonna read, because I don't know that I'll read all of it within this week or so, but I will let you know, and I'll update you with what I do end up reading. And then, as I said, if I pick up anything else besides these, I'll let you know in the second half of this video. Since I mentioned Elden Ring, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do a recap of my playthrough. And if you don't care about this part, or maybe you just don't care about video games in general, I'll have a timestamp so you can skip ahead. But we'll go ahead and start with the Fire Giant. The first time I played through this game, I really hated this boss fight, especially as somebody who is primarily a melee player. Not primarily, that's all I am in this playthrough of Elden Ring. So I really have to get up close and personal. And at the beginning of the fight, once you figure out how to dodge his attacks, it's not that bad, especially when you realize you don't have to sprint, you don't have to risk getting on your horse and then getting knocked off to hurry over and hit his foot. You can just very casually walk over to it, basically. And even though it's tedious and it takes time, I found this technique for the first phase to be really helpful, and it pretty much always guaranteed I could meet the second phase. And then once he rips off his leg, because that's a really practical thing to do, I realized that you can still just hit his foot even though it doesn't lock on, and you can still do plenty of damage. So I just would try to avoid getting hit by the fire, because obviously that does a ton of damage, and then just keep chipping away at his foot. That was always proving really successful for me. It might take a couple tries if you're not so ridiculously over-leveled when it comes to your health and your strength, but this method was really great for me. And I actually, on this playthrough, was expecting to die at least a couple times, but I actually ended up beating it on the first try, especially because I knew his fire attacks pretty well. So whenever there was one that I was rather sure I would get hit by, I would hop on the horse, run away, and then when he was getting done with the attack, then I'd run back toward him and then get off the horse, because if you get knocked off your horse when he's in the middle of one of his big attacks, then you're pretty much done for. It just does too much damage. So I actually find just jumping off the horse, getting in a couple hits, and then getting away was always really, really successful for me. And I'm very curious, if you are a melee player, how did you go about killing this? Because I know how the mages do it. I've watched, and you probably just beamed him to death. Now let's move into some of the areas of this game that are extreme pet peeves of mine. Last year I did a couple of videos. One was I discussed things I think are great about this game, and then one was all the things that make you want to bang your head against a wall. And I actually found the subterranean shunning grounds to be perhaps the most rage-inducing thing I hate in any game. Lies of P has this as well. Anytime you have to balance on stuff and the game doesn't kind of have something automatically built in where the character isn't a complete moron when it comes to balancing and they flip out every time you just barely touch the analog stick. I know I'm being a child and I'm being such a baby about this, but it is so annoying to me. So annoying. So unnecessarily tedious. But there is a thrill, just like with the boss fights, when you do succeed. And I'm letting this play through at normal time speed so that if you have struggled through this section, you can watch how I went about it. I will say on this playthrough, I did not actually go in at the end because I didn't want the Lord of the Frenzied Flame ending. I was trying to go for Ronnie's ending. So I didn't actually really need to come down here. I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do it because I just wanted that satisfaction, you know? Anyway, I praised this person's message because I thought it was funny and they deserved it. And then once I crumbled through the very bottom of this area, I decided, you know what? Good for me. You're a champion, and let's show it by leaping for joy. Sticking with annoying things, this thing, whatever the heck this thing is called, I don't remember, I don't care. I just had to come kill it because I was trying to do that quest that is basically from the Millennia clone girl. So anyway, I killed it, and because I'm somebody who generally is a close quarters combat person, I had to chip away at its health with a bow, and I ran up this little branch so I wouldn't get hit in the meantime, just like everybody else does, or at least a lot of people do. When I defeated it, I had to throw up those praise hands. Now for the only part of this game that actually really still gave me trouble, which would be Millennia, Goddess of Fraud, or Melania, because I feel like that's how the players in the game say it. I still hate her. I still think she's challenging, but the thing that worked for me pretty well was summoning my Mimic, and this particular weapon I have is pretty good at knocking her back. So if I could get a rhythm going where I hit her, and then the Mimic hit her, and then I hit her, and then the Mimic hit her, that worked great. I will say that dodging of the, I think it's called the waterfowl attack, best I've ever done it. I did go on to beat the game the second time. I got the Ronnie ending, which is what I was hoping for, but this playthrough made me really realize how much I had learned on my first playthrough. This was my very first Souls game. Not my first Souls-like game, but my first official Souls game, and really having that experience the first time, it really teaches you how much you actually are able to study the bosses, figure out their moves, strategize, and then execute, which was really exciting. The downside is that I am obviously so overpowered at this point that it really wasn't as much of a challenge anymore. So I'm really looking forward to the DLC, not just because I think this is a great game and I have fun exploring it and I'm reminded constantly of what a great open world game it actually is, but I want that challenge again, and I'm really excited for that. And let me know if you're in the same camp. Let me know if you've played this game. How many times have you played it? Do you play as a different style each time? Do you completely start over? Do you just go New Game Plus? I'd love to know. But anyway, let me know if you would like me to include more of these recap style gaming experiences within my vlogs. I'd be happy to include them. I think it's a lot of fun, and I like getting to connect with all of you through video games. But anyway, all that said, let's go ahead now and segue back to our manga and some Studio Ghibli. I'm actually going to start with Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. I watched the film, and when the opening credits started, it said based off of the graphic novel, and so I'm going to refer to the graphic novel as a graphic novel instead of a manga, but at some point I might interchangeably use manga. So regardless, I decided to watch the film first for a few reasons. One, I find that whenever I start with whatever the adaptation is and then go back, I generally have a more enhanced experience overall with the story, because if I start with the original work, and especially if the original work is something written or something that is like a manga or a graphic novel, those tend to flesh out the stories so much more. And then when I go to an adaptation, all I end up seeing, or maybe not all, that's a generalization, that's being a little dramatic, but oftentimes, I should say, I just end up recognizing all the things that are missing and all of what could have made the story even better if only they'd included this, or why did they cut this? This would have made this make so much more sense. And I have those thoughts running through my head, whereas if I go to the adaptation first, I can just watch that as it is, and then it feels like, oh, now I'm getting all these extra details, and now it's actually getting to be fully developed. And it's almost a little bit kind of like my experience with Witcher, where I started with, like a lot of us, The Wild Hunt, and then when I read the books, even though they are not a direct adaptation, even still, when I went back to the books, it just felt like, oh, okay, so this is the history of this, and this is why this relationship is this way. So that was one reason I decided to watch the movie first, and I'm curious if all of you have found that to be true for yourself. Do you find that you actually generally enjoy things better when you see the movie or adaptation first? But anyway, the other reason was that I just recently watched Grave of the Fireflies, and not that long ago I had watched Howl's Moving Castle, and then I just went to the movies and saw The Boy and the Heron, which we won't go into depth with today, but that movie was so weird. But anyway, so after having watched several Studio Ghibli movies recently, I just kind of was in the mood to watch another and really juxtapose them all and see their differences, see their similarities, see the way in which they have grown, because Grave of the Fireflies and Nausicaä, the Valley of the Wind are both older works. Nausicaä, I believe it was 1984. And obviously The Boy and the Heron is brand new. So it's just been really cool to see how it's developed, how different the stories are. I was kind of trying to survey in my head all of the Studio Ghibli movies I have watched recently, which would be the ones I just mentioned. And they're just all so different from one another. I will say Grave of the Fireflies and The Boy and the Heron have very similar openings. And I've actually seen some people make side-by-sides where they show the two. And it was interesting, having watched Grave of the Fireflies so recently, that when the opening started, it was really interesting to see exactly what I'm talking about, how much it's developed, how the animation style has improved and changed, and seeing it side by side, it really highlighted it, because I already thought it when I was in the movie theater. But regardless, getting back to Nausicaä, those are my reasons why I decided to watch the film. So I'm going to comment my thoughts, and that's what I'm referencing, but I do plan to get around to the graphic novels at some point, just not yet today. I really enjoyed this one. I think that it is a more streamlined plot, and maybe some people would disagree with that, but comparing it after having just watched The Boy and the Heron, which really was, like, I've never been on drugs, but I'm like, this is what I imagine being on drugs feels like. But compared to that, in my head, I'm like, okay, there's a fairly cohesive plot. Bad guys show up, and bad guys are going to cause destruction to basically the planet, this forest, and it's also going to harm the villagers, and in the long run, even though they think it's what's best, it's probably going to affect all of what remains of mankind. So you have that, and then Nausicaä is doing what she can to save her people, to try and encourage peace among everybody, and to encourage them to not harm the forest and the planet. So I think it was more streamlined in that sense. Here's our main protagonist, here's the antagonist, this is the plot, okay, let's go. And the setting itself, it was kind of established. It was almost a little on the nose at the beginning of, there's these toxins. It's a good thing I can't breathe these in because I have my mask on right now. If I were to breathe them in, I would die within 5 minutes. You know, they're giving you a pretty heavy-handed exposition. I didn't mind too much. At the end of the day, some Studio Ghibli is very symbolic, thematic, and it's a little more subtle, and some of it feels a little bit more like it's more for a younger audience, and thus the exposition you would expect to be a little bit more heavy-handed because you're thinking that this is going to appeal to a broader audience, the same way something like a middle grade story is probably not going to be too subtle with how they tell you, here's the setup and here's what's going on in my life. Nausicaä herself was almost too perfect of a main character, and I say almost because, coming back to the idea of this being more appealing to a younger audience, I think it's really important to have these heroic figures, and it's not that she doesn't struggle, and it's not that she doesn't have these moments of weakness, because she does. You see her break down a number of times. You see she does at one point sort of embrace her anger, and then she learns from that and thinks, this is not how I want to be because I don't want to continue these cycles of violence. I really do want peace. And so I think that seeing those little moments, that was enough, in my opinion, for her to still feel like a realistic character. But otherwise, she is so persistent, persevering. She is really also, I feel like in general, the Studio Ghibli protagonists are very resourceful. So that was really fun to see. And she also is loved by her people, and with good reason, because she cares about them. She cares about them as individuals and as a group. She does what she can all the time for them, even if it means sacrificing herself, her own safety. She's going to do what she can to help them. She will go up against whatever she has to, because if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. And I kind of miss seeing protagonists like that because we see so often now these extremely morally gray characters. It's just refreshing to see a good old-fashioned hero, and I was really excited to see that in Nausicaä. I also think the themes were similar to what I was saying about the exposition. They were a little heavy-handed, and I didn't mind because they were very fitting of the plot, and I think they're really it's a good message that a lot of us should reflect on. We do almost have cartoonishly bad guy type characters who are just doing whatever they want, regardless of who gets hurt, because they're like, well, this is what I want to do, and screw everybody else, basically. And they do commit a lot of violent acts. I was actually surprised just how violent this was. And it's not violent in the sense that it's gruesome, because it's not. It's just very much implied. There'd be so many moments while I was watching the movie where I was like, oh no. And I said oh no so many times. And at one point, someone else, right after I said oh no, someone in the movie said oh no. So that was my term of the day while watching that movie, because you really care about these people, and the bad guys are doing bad things, and no matter what Nausicaä does, what I did like is it wasn't because she was just so pure, everybody else laid down their weapons, and then everybody was happy that fixed all the problems. No matter how good she was, there were still adversaries. There were still people going up against her. And thematically, I think that made sense, that we can't just be good and thus everyone's good. We have to continuously live by our own principles. And even though that might not change other people's minds, we still have to do the best we can. And sometimes that goodness is what ends up persevering. So I really liked that. And then also, of course, the themes of the planet, harming the planet, trying to live in harmony. I thought that was done and executed beautifully is maybe not the right word, because the movie was, I think, almost utilizing imagery that was somewhat gross to look at. I mean, a lot of Studio Ghibli, everything looks like a painting and everything's so pretty. And in this movie, it wasn't the case, which I think made sense because it's kind of showing what could transpire if society really gets to a point where we are on the verge of extinction. And so I think there's this sense of dread that is just beneath the surface. And if we go beneath the surface, that's what's awaiting us. And so it's all around. So that's why I don't think it's right to say it's done beautifully. I think thematically it's done, you could say, beautifully, but with the imagery itself, I think it is done in a way that's very poignant and fitting. But regardless, I enjoyed the story very, very much. I enjoyed the movie. I am excited to read the graphic novel and see maybe if we flesh out the other kingdoms that show up, their enemies in the story, and then maybe get to learn a little bit more about the poison and the history and the lore and Nausicaa's family and the sword master, who was great. So maybe we'll get to see those characters a little bit more and those plot lines a little bit more. But it still, at the end of the day, I thought was fantastic. And I can't wait to continue my Studio Ghibli journey. Speaking of continuing certain journeys, I am back now into Vinland Saga. And I am very sad already because I just know that things are going to go south so quickly. I mean, you know that in the opening of the story. It is a revenge story at its core, and you know right away that our main character, Thorfinn, wants to avenge his father, so you know that things, when you do visit his past, you just are sad because you can just see that things aren't going to go well. There was a few things that I just found even more exceptional. I mean, at the very beginning of the story, there's a whole plot line about a slave that has escaped and Thorfinn's father wanting to do what he can to allow this man, I don't want to say too much if you've never picked this story up, but just wanting to give this man a sense of peace, even though it costs him, literally, it costs him very much to provide this, and this is so outside the norm, but the way in which Thorfinn's father, Thors, is able to see the humanity in another person despite how their culture views things just shows how heroic he is, how courageous he is, but in the smallest of ways. And sometimes I feel like it is those small acts of bravery that actually are the most moving. And that whole plotline I thought was just fantastic, but also Thorfinn reflecting when he's a little boy on where do people go when they want to leave here, and where they currently live is the place that his ancestors had escaped to. So the idea of, well, if this is where people escaped to, what happens when this is not enough? And just that sense of foreshadowing of the calm breaking apart, it's really hitting me. And I am kind of nervous to keep going with this story, but I am so glad to be back. I think Vinland Saga is amazing, and I don't know if I have a whole lot else to say just from this beginning. I have said before, in moving forward with this, I might do some spoiler discussions because I do want to talk more in depth about Vinland Saga, but if you've never checked it out, I definitely highly recommend it. For the month of February, I do want to kind of continue on, not just with Vinland Saga, but with more Studio Ghibli. I'm planning on watching Kiki's Delivery Service to continue seeing the full range of Studio Ghibli. But if I can, I'd like to watch another. So if you have if you just want to make any suggestions of whichever ones you think I should also watch in February, let me know. I plan to try to get through as much Studio Ghibli as possible this year, if not get through basically all of it. So if you have one that you think would go well, either because it's similar in tone or in feeling to Kiki's Delivery Service, or because it's polar opposite, let me know. If you have read Vinland Saga, let me know your thoughts on it. And then I almost forgot that I talked about Yona volume 40 earlier, so if you have any thoughts on that, let me know. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later.